Well, hello there, everybody. I've gone live a little bit earlier than planned. I kept changing the time around because I thought I had a client and then I didn't have a client, and then got pet food and to pick up my boys from school. Soon, not soon, I mean in an hour and a half, but given how long I usually spend lives, I thought it was probably an idea to start a bit. And I could see a few people already in here. So I thought, you know what, let's just get started. Lovely to see you guys. Hello, Peter and Mustang, my earliest people in the chat, two lovely ladies. Is it ladies' night tonight? Well, not night. Is it night? Must be. It's midday here, pretty much. We've got Lulu in the room with me. She's actually burying under the sheets. We've got Spooky chewing away on his Kong. And Kai jumped up and covered me in fur, and he's disappeared now. So hello, everybody. Say hello in the chat. Please feel welcome to join in. I cannot believe our numbers. There are so many new subscribers, and a lot of people have indicated that their favorite content is psychology related, which is probably kind of a good thing, given I'm a psychologist. Oh, hey, Kelly. Nice to see you. So today we're actually going into more psychology territory because we're going to talk a little bit about kind of forensic psychology stuff. Really good to see you too, Mustang. So today we're going to have a bit of a chat. I'm just going to do the intro episode because I think this is going to be a bit of a series. This is another one of our trademarks, guys. Unicorn. I've been saying it for months, and finally, we're going to actually have a chat about it. So I just thought I'd come on the screen and say hello first, but now I'm going to disappear so that you don't watch me flailing my arms around. And also so I can read stuff and access stuff easily and not worry about you seeing my concentrating face. Hey, Unindicted, lovely to see you. So many of my favorites in here. Definitely is ladies' night at the moment. We're outnumbering the boys. Oh, hey, Mimi. Good to see you. Here we go. We got a boy come in. Scott's in here. You're our token male at the moment. Lovely to see you guys. All of my faves. All right. So I'm going to go off the. I do this every time. I take myself completely off. And that's not the intention. There we go. That's what we want to do. Now, I don't have a lot of slides today. You can see recently I've been winging it a lot more, partly just because I'm doing so many videos and I don't have any time to get the slides ready. As it is, it's a lot, and I'm really enjoying it. But I have a tendency to hyper-focus, as everybody knows, and I hope everybody is okay with all the content. There's a lot coming out. Now, as I've mentioned, a lot of my work is very layered. So if you do follow me, you'll find that you're watching me kind of go through the process of making sense of this with you. And so if you watch earlier videos, you might see things that are different to what I might say in later videos. And that's because we continue to grow and evolve. And I will be the first one to admit if we need to correct misinformation or shift gears. And so, yeah, if you're watching along, if you're new to the channel, please know that there will be a little bit of an evolution of ideas if you watch whole series. Now, what I'm going to also do is I'm going to arrange the different topic areas into their own playlists now, because we have one giant playlist for the flawed case against Richard Allen, and it's getting a bit unmanageable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a playlist for the phone stuff. I'll make a playlist for the lost tip stuff, and I'll make a playlist for the psychology stuff. But that might be where we start. So you'll probably see a little bit of rearranging going on over the next week. I may try and focus on that rather than doing too many videos. Might be a good idea to slow down a tiny, tiny bit. Last night we we continued the car discussion, but we didn't get very far through our document. So we will continue with that later in the week. But today, let's hop into some forensic psychology. So I always like to use a bit of a Taylor Swift theme, you'll notice. So this is a quote, somewhat of a quote from a Taylor Swift song called Me. One of these things is not like the others. anyone who knows that. Anyway, I thought it was a good title for this Forensic Unicorn series, particularly this first episode. And you can see what I'm getting at here. The people who follow the channel know that I do not believe that Richard Allen is anything like these other adult onset offenders that he gets compared to. And so if he is indeed guilty of this crime, which I highly doubt, then he would be what we call a forensic unicorn. So what is a forensic unicorn? It is a term coined by myself and my best friend, ChatGPT, and it basically means an offender profile that doesn't exist in research or known case patterns. So today, I'm simply going to lay the groundwork. I'm not going to make any major conclusions or delve into the depths of understanding all of these offenders and the comparisons to Rick. What we're going to do is just sort of set the scene, set the stage, because, you know, I can't do anything quickly and briefly. I don't even know how I managed to do my Delphi primer video earlier today because I struggle to condense things. Hey TJ, lovely to see you. It is definitely ladies' night in here today. Lots of ladies. And we've got Scott as our token male at the moment. If there are any other guys in the background, feel free to come join us. Not a big crowd today. Everyone must be busy. Anyway, so let's get started. Now, you know my disclaimer. Usual thing is that I am a clinical psychologist. I have worked, goodness, croaky voice. I've worked in mostly clinical psychology, but I have had some experience in the forensic field as well. But I'm not acting in a clinical, forensic, or expert capacity in this context. So nothing I present here would constitute psychological assessment, diagnosis, treatment, or expert testimony. Additionally, all individuals we discuss are presumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. And as I always say, that doesn't even mean they're guilty, particularly in the case of Rick Allen. So the presentation is for discussion and education purposes only. All views expressed are my own views on publicly available information. I do find, obviously, my psychology background informs what I speak about. And also, I like to do lots of research on the topics of interest. And this one is definitely a topic of interest. Right. Let's hop in. This is what we're going to talk about today. So like I said, we're just setting the scene at the moment. So we're going to talk about just the broader concept of adult onset offenders. We're going to talk about criminal history versus deviance history. And we're going to talk about the comparisons that we're going to make when determining whether Rick Allen is literally a forensic unicorn, or his profile at least is. So we're going to look at a number of offenders that have been used as, I guess, comparisons to Rick Allen. Oh, why does it do this? There we go. Some of the people who believe Rick is guilty will suggest that he isn't as unusual as a lot of us who think he's innocent think he is. Hey, Deb, nice to see you. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare Rick to those offenders. We're going to see if he really does have any similarities with them. And we're going to compare things like their background history. We're going to compare the offense type and how many offenses. We're going to compare behavior during interrogation. And we're going to compare behavior in custody. So we've got lots of different dimensions to cover. There might be more that come up. This is why it's taken me so long to do this video, because there are so many different avenues to follow with this. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. So Richard Allen, if guilty of the Delphi murders, would have been 44 at the time of the crimes in 2017. Now, that is already a massive rarity. Okay, so whilst it's not rare for there to be first-time offenders at middle age, it is rare for there to be first-time offenders of unrelated victims in a sadistic crime of this manner. So it's not as rare to say, you know, a 44-year-old could murder their cheating partner. It's still, I mean, it's obviously rare, most of us are not doing that, but it is not as rare. It's not unheard of. Hey, Stephanie, welcome. Welcome in. It's not rare to see people do things that are deviant or aggressive for the first time later in life, but only in certain circumstances. And even when I say it's not rare, as I said, it generally is still rare. But what is super rare is for somebody to be above the age of 40 committing such a sadistic, violent offense, particularly against unknown victims, and in this case, unknown juvenile victims, in broad daylight, and then getting away with it. Okay. And getting away with it for an extended period of time. So there's lots of factors here that are incredibly rare when we're looking at adult onset offenders. Now, when it comes to Rick, he's even more rare than the rarest of the rare. So, long story short, that's going to be the conclusion of this. And I think most people know that that is my opinion here. I believe that if Rick Allen is guilty of this crime, he is indeed a forensic unicorn, which means completely unheard of. And therefore, I really think, along with all of the other stuff that we've dug up, that Rick Allen is indeed innocent and has been wrongfully convicted of the Delphi murders. Okay, so let's go into just understanding a little bit more of the arguments that people raise and figuring out whether they hold any weight. So, the first thing that comes up over and over again when I have mentioned that Rick Allen would be incredibly rare if he committed this crime because he was aged 44 at the time of the offense, the first thing that comes up is people say, well, there are lots of people like that. Think of BTK, think of Russell Williams, think of the Lisk guy who is still at the moment not proven guilty. And they say, well, they were all arrested later in life, and BTK didn't have any history of criminal offences, and nor did Russell Williams. And so a lot of these names kind of get thrown out. And I've made a video way back that's kind of embarrassing, to be honest, because it was in the early days where every second word was because I felt super nervous getting on camera and going on YouTube. Things have changed since then. Still lots of but not quite as many as before. And I talked about why Rick Allen and BTK are not alike. Now, let's make it interactive today. Anyone in the chat want to tell me one of the main differences between Richard Allen and BTK? There's lots of differences, but what are some of the key ones? Oh, I'll put your comments up, guys. Checking that you're listening here. I feel like I'm being a lecturer here now. Yes, TJ's got one already. Serial killers often come clean after arrest. I think that's generally the case. Yeah. They either come clean or I think they deny it forever, essentially. They certainly don't break down and have a psychological decompensation. So, yeah. Adita, yes, BTK was guilty. I agree. That's a big difference already. What do you think are some other reasons that people suggest that BTK is similar to Rick Allen? Why do you think they do? Scott says basic psychological makeup and no history of deviancy. Yeah. I mean, so people will compare Rick and they will compare him to BTK because BTK was a middle-aged man when he was arrested and incarcerated for murder. Oh, here we go. Here's some good comments here as well. Unindicted says double homicide out the gate. Yep. Oh, and here you go. I am Celt. Spot on as well. Age, married man, children. So you can see on the surface, you could go, oh, they're kind of similar, right? I mean, BTK, no one knew. He was living in plain sight, even after he'd committed all these heinous crimes. And he was married, he had kids, like long-term stability. So there you go. People like that do exist, Amy. So Rick's not so rare. But as Unindicted has said, Rick would be rare because, First of all, the crime that he commits is actually considered what we would consider an escalation. Many offenders of this type don't escalate so quickly into a double homicide of two juveniles in broad daylight. Oh, no worries, Cal. Feel free to listen, but definitely comment if there's anything that you want to comment later as well if you get a chance. So, on the surface, these two men look alike, but underneath, there is a far bigger story because BTK actually committed his first crime at the age of 29. That's absolutely in the expected age of these types of offenders, which I believe is usually between the 20s and 30s. So 29 is not an unusual age to commit your first crime if you're in this group of serial killers and sadistic offenders, okay, which none of us are. So probably shouldn't have said you, them, right? So BTK is not actually an adult onset offender. So straight off the bat, BTK doesn't actually fit in this category. He's also not like the others because he's your typical profile of a serial killer. Now, probably what I should have said straight off before we even started talking, Kai's come and he's got his bushy tail on the screen. Thank you, Kai. Is that we're not basing this on theoretical profiles. What we're talking about here is historical data about offenders. We're talking about, things that have been proven, I suppose, when documenting historical offenders. So we're looking at more real life experience and evidence as opposed to theoretical knowledge. So BTK does not fit in this category. Can we knock him off straight off the bat? What does everyone think? One of the other things that comes up when you say that Rick is not like BTK is people will say, well, how do we know that Rick Allen hasn't offended before? And that would have been a fair question in 2022, perhaps, when he was arrested. But 3 years on, I don't really feel like it is a fair question anymore because none of us in those 3 years have heard Rick be linked to any other case, to any other crime. No one else has come forward to suggest that he did anything criminal or deviant towards them. Now, I know there's that one YouTube video on a tiny channel that I don't even know if I could still find it, of someone who said that they worked with Rick and that he was a bit weird. Look, whether that is or isn't true, it doesn't actually really matter because creepy behavior is not the same as deviance. So even if he made a joke about kidnapping them or whatever, if he was a little bit sleazy, I mean, not ideal, but not really what we're talking about when we're talking about historical criminal or deviant behavior. Now, I take that story with a pinch of salt because we don't know who that person is. It's not verified. And oh, you thought I was gone. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, so the story that we've heard, that some of you may have heard, I don't know that it's actually accurate or if it's actually verified. It was on a very small YouTube channel, and no offense to that. I mean, I've been a very small YouTube channel too, but yeah, it doesn't feel, I agree with you, Deetra, it doesn't really feel particularly reliable. So, as I said, even if it were true, and I don't want to lean into saying it were true because that's actually really unfair as well, because we've not heard any other reports like that about Rick. In fact, I think I saw another unverified person on Reddit some time back. I don't know if this is still there, but that person indicated that Rick was a really nice person to work with and had positive things to say about Rick. So at the end of the day, I think this one negative comment is a bit of a drop in the ocean. TJ says the girl was a lesbian and Rick asked her what it was like to be with a woman. Like, I mean, if that did happen, which I'm not sure if it did, I mean, it's an intrusive question. I wouldn't particularly find that appropriate, but it's probably not on the level of deviance that we're going to talk about today and in future episodes of this series. So, yeah. I saw Scott's comment. So Scott was saying devil's advocate. Scott likes to play devil's advocate, don't you, Scott? If Rick pulled off a forensically really good crime, no DNA, etc., they might not be able to link or prove it. Yeah, but then again, we are going back to thinking that he's some criminal mastermind, you know? Like, even the quote unquote best of them stuff up. So, how is it that Rick Allen's done so well, only to stuff up this time by dropping an unspent round at the scene of the crime and then keeping a similar one in a trophy box at home, which, I don't believe any of that stuff, of course. Hey, Charles, nice to see you. Charles, you've not been listening to my videos. I know when people haven't been listening because they ask me questions I've already answered. So, Kathy's comments in the interview, she's been super, super spooked, right? And she doesn't know what's going on. But anyone in here who's been married or been in a close relationship with someone who they trust, and that could also be a non-romantic relationship, think a sibling, a best friend, a parent. If your loved one were at a park on the day a serious crime occurred, would you grill them about exactly where they were, what they did, what path they walked on? Because I wouldn't. Oh, Mustang, you heading out? All right, we'll see you later. Please catch the replay. But yeah, come back when you can. The thing is here that Kathy does say, but I thought you weren't on the bridge. She is upset. She's not upset or scared of Rick. That's not my interpretation, and that certainly wasn't Ash and Mel's interpretation either. Our interpretation was she was just confused. She had been told all sorts of things, and I think she was also really worried that she might have said the wrong thing, and she might have got Rick into trouble. And he says, it doesn't matter, babe. Like, he doesn't even get angry with her or upset with her. I know some people say that they interpret the way he speaks as manipulative. Look, I didn't get that vibe, and nor did Mel or Ash. And now we're not the authority on everything. Sorry, Kai is scratching a chair in the background. Excuse me, Mr. Kai. Yeah, that's actually deviant behavior. Stop that. I don't know if you heard him go, and I asked him that. It's getting a little bit naughty these days. Anyway, I think they're now both fighting. So Lulu's actually hitting him off the bed. Sorry, guys. I've got my own little deviant criminals here. I'm losing my train of thought. So, what was I saying? Sorry, guys. These cats are getting my attention off track. So, yeah, I mean, I don't believe that the interaction between Kathy and Rick in that interview is as concerning as it sounds on the surface. So, yeah. I saw Scott not playing devil's advocate, which was good to see. Scott, you were saying before, I'm going to go back. Which is, especially if Rick does have neurodivergence. So anyone who listened to Ash and I speaking over the weekend, we were both saying this would be a query we would have. Obviously, needs to be looked into further before anyone would sort of confidently state it, but there definitely seem to be indicators that were worth looking into. And I Am Celt says, did he ask in a malicious way or a curious Gen X Midwestern man way? Exactly. Who knows? Who knows? TJ says, Kathy said they parked at CPS building before the Freedom Bridge was built. After the bridge was built, there was no need to go park at the CPS building. Yeah, I'm not sure when she said that, but yeah, it's a possibility. I mean, I'm not sold on where he parked, but yeah. I Am Celt says, was her interview before or after seeing her husband in the room with Holman? It was before. I believe she was being interviewed by another one of them. I mean, who knows? Mullen Liggett, maybe. Yeah, she was speaking to somebody else, and they were saying that someone saw Rick at the trails and saw him, I believe, around the crime scene. Well, not at the crime scene itself, but around the bridge. And again, a little bit like they were saying to Rick, they were using things that were not true. And that, of course, is going to make anyone start to feel completely confused and gaslit, essentially. I'm going to keep going down a little bit. Yeah, I would assume that the person who interviewed Kathy would probably be Mullins or Liggett. It seems to always be Liggett, Mullins, and Holman, right? Okay. So Charles, let's not use terms like that. But yes, he did mention that he had a. I think both him and Kathy said that it wasn't he didn't feel he would actually have hurt himself, but it was a cry for help. And whilst you might say it's after Delphi, I mean, it was 2 years after. It wasn't in the initial aftermath. And this is in a man who's had a historical struggle with mental health his whole life. So he was struggling with anxiety from the age of childhood, extreme anxiety, and extreme depression. So the way that Kathy describes it in her interview, and of course also from the details Westcott provides, Rick was struggling his entire life, struggling to get out of bed, struggling to function, but pushing himself through because I think, he worried about wanting to support his family and provide and be financially kind of secure. And so, yeah, I think the fact that he had put the gun in his mouth, he mentioned it was a cry for help, and then he spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility. I mean, look, that is a long time to spend in a psychiatric facility. I don't know how the system works over in the States. I think it would be quite rare to spend that long in a psychiatric facility here in Australia. But that said, I've certainly had clients who've spent time in psychiatric hospitals, sometimes several weeks, maybe into months. And realistically, they're generally people who just have a very long-term history of, serious mental health issues. So sometimes it may be trauma backgrounds, but sometimes it is just intractable depression. And sometimes, again, there are these layers of neurodivergence that have not been assessed for. So, as Ash and I were saying on the weekend, unfortunately, in our industry, there hasn't been the best understanding of neurodivergence. So, I admit this myself up until a few years ago when I met Ash, actually, and she taught me so much about it. I didn't have the best understanding of autism, particularly. And interestingly, I've had clients where I'd worked with them for some years and had never even suspected it. And then when I actually fully understood autism and had a much more clearer, more depth of understanding around it, I was like, goodness, I missed this for years. And it's been life changing for those clients because a lot of those clients are people who are so depressed. They feel like complete outsiders in this world and they think there's something terribly wrong with them. And so when you then actually help them to understand their neurotype, it can be life changing. It literally can save their lives. So yeah, I just think that if you don't know much about neurodivergence, look into it, guys, because there are a lot of undiagnosed neurodivergent people walking around masking, and they're struggling with the feeling of being different and alone and alien in the world, whilst also simultaneously constantly working really hard to mask and to fit in. So I've kind of explained this before, and I repeat this because it's a key point just in general in terms of our well-being as a human beings, essentially. And that is, I want you to think of a neurodivergent person, and this is a generalization, but I think it's just a good analogy, as somebody who is walking around in the cold winter with no clothes on. Now, I don't mean that in a weird way, but they literally, or maybe just really light clothes on. They're walking around with summer clothes on, and they're saying, it's freezing out here. Everything is hurting. Like my ears are freezing off, and I just feel so uncomfortable. And everyone else is wearing their woolly coats and jackets, and they're like, no, it's not. It's fine. There's nothing wrong. And then the neurodivergent person thinks, well, I better put the coat on too, because then maybe I'll feel better. And that's masking. They put the coat on, but the coat hurts. The coat feels heavy because it's also impacting their nervous system. And so they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. And they go through life feeling incredibly uncomfortable. The nervous system is perceiving and like the sensory and the emotional intensity of the world can be more extreme, and that can feel really painful. So I know that I'm kind of going off track from this topic, but I'll never not take that. Um, I'll never take that opportunity to discuss neurodivergence and why it's something that's so misunderstood. Now let me go back in the comments because I don't want to miss anyone. So Scott's just talking about treatment-resistant depression. Yeah, and I mean, I've known people who've been hospitalized for long periods because of medication changes, sometimes as well to do with some of, like, they used to do ECT, they do TMS. I don't know a lot about those treatments, but yeah, those could be also things that are going on during hospitalization. Again, in Australia, maybe our system's a little bit different. So I'm not 100% sure what would happen, but I certainly had patients need some time to adjust to medication. Some people are particularly sensitive to medications too, whereas others can switch medications no hassle at all. So it's very unique. Okay, Mustang, you think that it was related as well. So yeah, I can understand there are people who believe that Rick is guilty, who will say, well, the time frame matches, and potentially yes, I guess it could. However, I guess I still would say it also coincides with middle age as well, which can be a difficult period. It also coincides with just, I mean, I guess a whole lot of adjustments in his life. You know, that's around the time, wasn't it, that his daughter got married? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's more just that's an adjustment. And life stresses don't have to be bad. You know, some of the biggest stresses are weddings, moving house. You know, they're not always negative things as well. So it's hard to really know. Okay, let's keep going. Unindicted, unrelated question. No, not at all. I mean, cognition is certainly an important aspect here too. Now, I don't know, they didn't mention directly in the testimony of Westcott what his IQ was. And I think if they look, my, I guess, interpretation of that, and it's speculative, but I would imagine that if they didn't mention it, that it was probably around average. But what she did mention was extremely low aspects of executive functioning. So I think it was problem solving and processing speed. Now, that could be to do with medications that he was on. It could be the after effects of Haldol and the psychotic episode. But also we know that processing speed and problem solving, again, are part of the executive functions, which, again, can sometimes be a comparative weakness in people who are neurodivergent. So people like myself, poor working memory. My working memory is awful. I think I would forget my head if it wasn't screwed on, and I'm certainly a lot slower with reading. So I'm a quick thinker in a lot of ways, a quick talker too, guys, as you can tell. But it takes me a lot longer to process written information. So Charles, apparently they did find a medication that helped him. So Kathy was saying, I think it was Prozac that he was on, and things had stabilized eventually. I think the problem is that with psychiatric medications, there is so much variability in response. There's also variability within a person. So I'll give you a personal experience. So for me, my response to my ADHD meds has changed post cancer. And the reason for that, I believe, it's my own little bit of research, but I believe could be to do with my hormone levels. So as most of you know, I'm on pretty heavy duty hormone blockers because I had breast cancer diagnosed 3 years ago, and I have to be on these medications that pretty much mean I have no estrogen or very little estrogen in my body. And since that, I've noticed that the same medication that I used to take before, I mean, that was the medication I took even before kids. Now, when I took it, I was hugely sensitive to it, and I had insomnia and irritability, and it was a lower dose, and I was responding so much differently. So our responses to medications can change over time as well. Okay. So yeah, I mean, overall, if I look back to when I first was exploring the psychology of Rick Allen, I had that diagnostic consideration in my mind around executive functioning concerns because of what Westcott had said in her report. And so, again, my recommendation, and as I said, this is just reviewing publicly available information, so it's not a diagnosis, but I would, if I were looking at that case and were providing expert opinion or going to assess him, I would be looking at assessment of neurodivergence. Yeah, definitely autism and ADHD. Okay, guys. And so BTK IQ wise, I don't know. I'll look into it for you, unindicted. So, what I'm going to try and do, so today was just going to be an introduction. And then what we'll do is we'll go through different offenders, if you like, over the weeks. So, I will do a bit of like a deep dive into each offender. And then we can kind of talk about that offender too, because that's kind of interesting true crime stuff anyway. We can talk about the psychology of each of those offenders, and then we'll do a comparison to Rick. So if you guys are interested, I can definitely do that. You guys can certainly throw out names. The ones I was thinking of were BTK, Russell Williams. I'm going to do the Catholic Supply Store murder, which it's harder to find information on him, but his name is Thomas Bruce. We've got the Granny serial killer over here in Australia. But yeah, if there's anyone else you want me to talk about, happy to. Even if they're not an adult onset offender, we can still talk about it. Okay, adult onset offenders in this group are really rare. I mean, Russell Williams would probably be the closest, along with Thomas Bruce. Charles, Prozac is one of the most prescribed medications. I don't know now, but yes, in the past it probably would have been. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that it would have been the medication tried first for him. So a lot of the time there are different classes of antidepressants. There are atypical antipsychotics that can be used for depression as well. There's all sorts of things that can be used for depression. So not everyone starts on the same medication. And even within a class of medication, so Prozac and Zoloft, Lexapro, they are all part of the SSRI medications, but you can still actually have a different response to different medications within the same class. Deb has an excellent point there. There is now genetic pathology testing that's helpful to determine, or GenPath. I don't know. Is that genetic path? I've heard of the testing though, but yes, it can determine what your response might be to different medications and help you find the one that works best. So yeah. I'm sorry, Charles. Yeah, I mean, look, some people have a really, really difficult response to some of these medications. So particularly when young people are being put on SSRIs, they need to be monitored very closely, because whilst the aim of the SSRI is to reduce the depressive symptoms, in a very select small group, sometimes things can amplify. And also then, there are other side effect profiles and sometimes withdrawal effects as well if the person, isn't taking it regularly. So they can be incredibly helpful, but they can also certainly be something that needs to be closely monitored by a doctor, essentially. Okay, well, we kind of jumped off, but that's totally okay. I love talking about anything psychology related. So I think the point, though, that I was getting to was when people say, Rick Allen has no history, and then they try to compare it to the fact that, well, other people had not been arrested before either, and they were first arrested at middle age. BTK is the name that comes up. Now, obviously, as we know, BTK has a long history, and the majority of adult onset offenders are not adult onset offenders. And what you tend to find is when you dig deeper, when they get their DNA on file, or the person is kind of in the media, then other names come forward, other people come forward, and will actually say, or they'll actually find more connections to other crimes. And even if they don't get charged and sentenced and convicted of those crimes, there's lots of question marks over their head. So I think of Ivan Milat, who was a big serial killer here in Australia, and there was often suggestions that he had killed a lot more people than the victims that were officially kind of discussed in the case. And sometimes it can't be proven, but there's certainly always these whispers around these things. Now, I haven't heard anything like that around Rick. We haven't heard one possibility of any other crime that he could be linked to. So that is straight away incredibly rare and very odd. And that then would put him in the adult onset offender group rather than the traditional serial killer or sadistic murderer group, which is the first kind of, I guess, elimination, right? So once we're then getting into the adult onset offender group, it is a rarity. There are very few people in this group, and we're going to talk about some of the people that fit into this group. Maybe next time we'll go into that. Scott did actually send me some really great articles, so we can kind of do a little bit of a review of some of the literature and the case studies. But it is incredibly rare to have an adult onset offender. But the point I'm going to make, my thesis over this entire series of videos, is going to be that even within that rare group, Rick does not fit. Okay. So one of the things we notice about that rare group is that even in the rare group that do not have a history of offending, it's very rare for them to not have a history of deviance. So every single one of the offenders that I've looked at has some historical indicators. Okay. So they might have decades sometimes: stalking, fetish behavior, voyeurism, DV, domestic violence, sexual boundary violations. So they may not have officially legally documented offending behavior, and it may not meet the history of not the history, the definition of a legal offence, but it is still deviance. Charles, we can definitely talk about Rex Heuermann. Of course, he's still on remand and he's not at this point proven guilty. However, yes, even if we lean towards him being guilty, we've got to remember that there's still factors of Rex Heuermann that are consistent with the more common profile. So I think the time of first, what's the age of first offence with him if he is indeed guilty? Let's have a look. Now, I'm going to say to you guys, I believe he probably is guilty, but I'm just being fair to say that he hasn't been proven guilty yet, has he? When is his trial? Is there a trial? I'm guessing there's a trial. He's going to say he's not guilty, right? Okay. So there you go. Yeah. So if it's early 30s, then he doesn't fit in this group, Charles. So we're talking about 40 plus here. And I know that sort of might seem like this arbitrary cutoff, but it is important. We know that the majority of serial killers and sadistic murders occur or happen. No, the first offence happens within that earlier age range. It's very rare for the first offence to occur beyond the age of 40, which is why Russell Williams is the one that comes up as being the closest that we could probably suggest. But even then, we're going to do a full comparison to Russell Williams too. And we're going to show, well, I'm going to show that Rick and Russell are nothing alike either, based on those different categories of comparison that I've mentioned. Okay, so I'm trying to stay on track here, guys. I don't know why. This just feels like it's so much stuff to talk about, and I'm not as anchored as I am with the others with a piece of evidence that we can kind of anchor onto. So I hope this isn't too rambly. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the majority of these people, in fact, literally, I couldn't find one person that didn't have some indicator historically, whether it was the more extreme indicators, like I said, stalking and, far more violent or aggressive behavior, or whether it was, unusual behavior. Now, I don't mean unusual behavior like, we all have our little unusual quirks. I mean things like narcissism and sadism, like entitlement, like the dark triad type behaviors, really poor impulse control, relationship dysfunction, emotional volatility. I mean, that's not relationship volatility in itself isn't a massively strange behavior, but it is a behavior that we tend to see in these offenders. Now, remember what I say here is that these quote unquote deviant behaviors or problematic behaviors don't mean that someone is going to be a killer. However, it seems like all of these adult onset offenders have at least some of these qualities. Okay, so if we drew a Venn diagram. Okay. Um, so yes, so with the majority of them, there is some sort of historical factor there. Now, if we look at Rick, I know people will say, well, he's supposedly a sex addict. Well, that's only according to Dr. Weiler, right? Because who else has said that? Westcott didn't say that. Clearly, they would have had his medical records. Nobody else has diagnosed him as that. His phone history that they looked at didn't indicate that. So he's hidden it very well if he is. I remember cases in the past where it comes out after someone is arrested of a crime that all these people will come out, whether they're escorts or people who've had liaisons with that person, and they'll say yes, they were a sex addict or whatever. But that doesn't happen here. Again, Rick's been plastered all over the news for how many years now? We're now at 3 years, and yet nobody's come forward to say, oh yeah, he was the creepy guy that that used to hook up with me or follow me around, other than this vague interview, right? So, well, whether his email means that or not, Charles, I guess doesn't, again, that isn't considered deviance, because otherwise there'd be plenty of men and women who use a lot of sexualized ways of talking, even in this online space, who we would then have to say are all deviant. Now, I personally, that's not the sort of the way that I speak. I don't use heavy sexual innuendo, but again, sexual innuendo would not be considered deviant. It would be more deviant if it is crossing boundaries, absolutely, because that's a consent violation. And I guess there's increasing ways that it can become deviant. But in and of itself, we can't necessarily say his email address is an indicator of deviance. So if we kind of go through this list, we don't have any indicator of any paraphilia. It's okay, Charles. I know you. And I always have an answer for you anyway, Charles. Don't let you get away with it, do I? I'll never forget the very first time I met Charles was on Diana's live. Gosh, this was in middle of winter here, so it must have been around August time. I was at the snow with my kids, and I remember I was talking to Charles, and we were getting into a little debate, and neither of us switched our opinion at all. So there you go. I've always got an answer. I think everyone knows that, right, Scott? I've always got an answer for you too. Okay, so I should be a lawyer, shouldn't I? I should be a lawyer because, I will literally just keep arguing. I never give up. So no history of paraphilias. No escalating fantasy that we're aware of. No relationship dysfunction. Poor impulse control. I mean, the only thing we've heard is that sometimes when he drinks, I guess, a lot of people when they drink can have poor impulse control, but nothing significant. Entitlement, we don't hear any indicators of that from anyone. Narcissism, don't hear any indicators of narcissism. In fact, the opposite. He's got very low self-esteem. Now, obviously, narcissism doesn't always mean high self-esteem. There are narcissistic people who there's the more vulnerable narcissists. Who is 6'9"? Who in the chat 6'9"? That is super tall. Anyway, sorry guys, I got sidetracked there. So with narcissism, the theory is that a narcissistic individual may have a very fragile, low sense of self, but then they kind of fracture from that and use a sort of grandiose narcissistic defense rigidly. In a more vulnerable narcissist, they may play victim and they may present as low self-esteem, poor me type of person. However, they they're usually not presenting the way Rick does. Rick presents more as someone who seriously just feels bad about himself. I'm not seeing indicators of manipulation. I know others may say they do, but I don't really see that. Everyone's comparing heights. Okay, come on, guys, everybody in the chat. I feel like we're like back in like high school days when the internet first came out and you used to do ASL. Who remembers ASL? It was age, sex, location. So you want mine, guys? I am 42 for only another 9 days, and I'm female, and I'm a she, her, and I live in Australia. What about you guys? And my height, my height, goodness, what other, we're not going to give weights here though, guys, okay? Oh my goodness, Charles, snap, we're the same age. There you go. My height is 5 foot. See, I don't know. See, I'm a bit like Rick. I mean, I might change my height on my license and stuff because I don't really know. I thought I was 5'6", but then when I get measured, it's probably closer to 5'5". Yeah. Anyway, hey, hello. So sorry, I didn't even say hello to you as when you came in, but hello. Thank you for joining us. I was off on a bit of a rant about something, so apologies, people who pop in and I don't say hi. Come in and chat, everybody. It's a bit of a small group today. Yeah, I don't know why. Maybe everyone's busy. It's a weekday, I guess. Weekends are probably more the time people come online late, and I don't know what time it is where you guys are. Oh, there you go, unindicted. 60. Mississippi. Cool. I have no idea how old everybody is, actually. Isn't that funny? We talk to each other sometimes, daily, some of us. And yeah, I don't know how old people are, or sometimes where exactly they come from. So anyway, well, thanks for the people who are in here. I know not everyone's going to enjoy, I guess, the deep psychological content, but I know that there are plenty of people who do. So thanks for sticking around and watching it. Okay. So deception and double life, we don't see that in Rick. We don't see, we see emotional concerns, but not emotional volatility. There's a difference. Emotional concerns like depression and anxiety would not be considered emotional volatility. Emotional volatility is more going to be someone who sort of, has major kind of meltdowns. And, I guess I would see it more generally as being more anger and aggression. Oh, Kelly's from Indiana. Awesome. And in her 40s. So seems like a lot of us are older, not old, but older. Anyone in their 20s in here? I don't know if there are, which I would have been in my 20s, but I do feel like this space is a lot more people in their 40s and beyond. There you go. And no prior arrests. So Rick really just does not tick any of the deviance boxes there, guys. There really is no indicator of deviance. He has a very stable life. He has serious mental health issues, yes, but that is not considered deviance, because otherwise I would be deviant, and I'm sure other people in this chat, we've all shared a psychological mental health history, and we've all indicated that or not we've all, but a lot of us have. And so realistically then that would mean we'd all fit in that category. And to be honest, my understanding would be that traits like depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and particularly that sort of ruminative worry would actually not be consistent with these types of offences. Okay. So I know we always quote that, people with a mental health issue are not more likely to commit a crime than others. In fact, they're more likely to be the victim of a crime. Scott's talking and Mustang are talking about alcohol. Look, Kathy does say that he can be a bit mouthy when he's drunk a bit. Again, is that really emotional volatility? I did mention it could be, but again, he's still quite controlled within that. She said he might hurt himself, but he actually doesn't break anything. He doesn't hurt anybody else. So, I don't know how many people here are drinkers. I'm not, but would you feel like when you drink, you can become a bit more emotionally labile? So I think I'd call that lability, not volatility, I suppose. Now, we're getting to the 1 hour mark, and I've got to pick up the kiddies soon. And I think it might be a good place to stop for now. and just have a quick chat for 5 minutes, and then we'll finish off. Well, actually, one last thing. So, what is an adult onset offender? It's a first homicide after the age of 40, no previous convictions, and appear quote unquote normal outwardly. Oh, Scott, so you're saying maybe Kathy underplayed it? Possibly. I don't know. I guess again, my vibe from Kathy is that she's a pretty direct sort of person. Like I feel like she I mean, that's the sense I get from her. I don't get a sense that she's sort of very quiet and what's the word? I'm trying to think. I just get the sense she's like me. She says it how it is. So yeah, I don't know. Um, so yeah, I know the hour went quickly, didn't it, guys? Because usually we're here for like 2 hours these days. But yeah, so what we're looking at for these adult onset offenders are people with their first homicide after the age of 40 and no criminal history. So if you guys find anyone like that you want me to look into, by all means, send me the name. We've got Russell Williams and we've got Thomas Bruce. Those are the two names that I feel come up more. There are some others, but a lot of the time their homicides are what we would call instrumental violence. And so instrumental violence is usually violence that, not instrumental. Is it instrumental? Yes, instrumental violence. So we've got reactive violence. So that's, the person who walks in on their spouse cheating and loses it and goes into a rage. Okay. And then we've also got people who commit crimes to gain something. So things like an armed robbery or, trying to get inheritance or something like that. So, you will actually find that you may notice there will be some adult onset offenders in those categories, but we're here talking about a sadistic offense. We're not talking about an offense that was to make sure that you have the inheritance money or you get revenge on someone that upset you. We're talking here about if Rick Allen were the offender of this crime, there wouldn't be any real motive other than potentially sadism, right? Sexual, it could be sexually motivated or just generally violence motivated. It's not what we would call a crime that was related to a need or a reaction to something. Not, what's the word? Tangible, I suppose. Okay. So if you guys can think of any more, send them to me, like either comment on here or send me an email. I'm happy to look into all of these. I love true crime, so I'm never going to be bored of looking into different criminals and looking at how they are the same or different. I tried to figure out a way to do a matrix of this because there's so many different qualities to compare. And that's why I've really held off on doing this video because there's so much to talk about. But anyway, okay, well, does anyone have any questions or comments before we finish up today? I felt like that was a lecture, so I hope that wasn't too lectury. I like this area. It's really interesting, but I feel like there's way more pressure when it's the area that I like. Are you talking about me, Charles, that I ignore your DMs? I'm terrible with messages. I really am. I sometimes go through a flurry of replying and then I'll go through days where I don't. My best friend gets really sad sometimes because I forget to. Yes, we are going up in subs really, really well, Scott. I think, we're getting promoted more, which definitely helps with the algorithm. So we're getting a lot of new subs. I don't know if they're all Delphi related. But yeah, the view count's a little bit slim, but that is what it is. We're just going to keep showing up, presenting information in the way that we do. I was kind of trying to define what this channel was yesterday, and I think I want to update our description here to being like contextualizing true crime, where we're helping see the evidence in a context. We're looking at it through the sort of layered, nuanced perspective, and we're integrating different areas. So I'm proud of the content that I make. I know it won't appeal to everyone. But I think you guys all know I'm not going to change my approach. And in fact, what I'm doing now is refining my approach because I don't want to actually fall into patterns that don't fit very well with me as a person. So, yeah, this channel is always dedicated to bringing things that are factual and nuanced and looking at complexity. The only snark that we're going to throw are little bits and pieces towards the investigation, but, realistically staying kind and not leaning heavily into conspiracy theories. So I am always willing to admit when things look sneaky and suspicious, as you know, and I will let you know when I think, I may be reaching a little bit, but I will generally still only reach based on logic. So that might not appeal to everyone. I know that's not always going to be as entertaining um, as maybe more shocking kind of bombshells, but I think we get some good bombshells on this channel. It's just that the bombshells sometimes, aren't kind of clickbait, I suppose, but they're still really useful bombshells. I mean, so I hope that the loyal people will continue to come back. I'm really still concerned. There is a lot of misinformation out there still about Delphi. I'm catching so many things that are erroneous, and I don't want to keep being the person calling it out because then I look like I'm being petty, but I'm not really being petty because I catch myself out and I take accountability for that too. I just think that to me, what's most important is getting to the bottom of it, even if I don't really like what the bottom of it is. But so far, I still think that I'm pretty firm in my conviction that Rick is not guilty and this is a wrongful conviction. And I just hope that the content that I make is full of integrity and warmth, and that if people watch this after, whether they're people who are directly involved in this case, that they will be satisfied that I made content that was ethical and as accurate and factual as possible and as respectful as possible too. So you won't hear me lean into too much conspiracy. You won't hear me lean into blaming people within the family particularly, but anyone who there's no reason to be kind of looking into. And I won't be blaming anyone unless there is really, probable cause. And even then, I would always caveat that with speculation for sure. Anyway, guys, I'm so thankful for the loyal group that are in here. I hope that more people catch the replay. I'll keep making content, even if the viewer count drops. I know I got a few people that like to be in here. So, yeah. Thanks, God. I always appreciate you being here. And even if it's just a few of us chatting and continuing this, I'm willing to kind of do it because it's a fun conversation and a useful conversation, I think. And we got some good insights even through that chat and the questions being asked. I think we kind of still touched on neurodivergence and medications and mental health. And yeah, I hope that was enjoyable and helpful. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. And I will jump back on later in the week and we'll finish off the car stuff. Thank you so much for being here, Dita. I loved seeing you today. Really love your support. Thank you, Charles, for being here. Thank you, Mustang, for being here. Who else did we have? We had Unindicted, who is just such a lovely, loyal person who pops in all the time. Alosa, thank you for joining. I am Kelt. Thank you for joining as well. I'm trying to think. We had Stephanie back in here a while ago as well. Let's see if I'm missing anyone. I don't want to miss anyone. This is why I shouldn't start saying names because then I worry I'm going to miss somebody. But really appreciate everybody who pops in. So even if I don't mention your name, TJ, thank you for coming in. Deb as well. Okay, I think that's pretty much everyone. Mimi came in earlier on and said hi too. But have a great day. Bye.